Welcome. This is going to be my first attempt at doing a book review type video, I suppose. Hopefully not the last. The book is Animorphs, #1. Hopefully I get a little bit better as time goes on, but I'm starting with Animorphs, #1, The Invasion, because I never finished this series when I was younger, and now, as you can see behind me here, I've got them all 54 books, as well as all of the, companion books? Alternamorphs, Megamorphs, the Chronicles, Visser, etc. And I intend to read through all of them because I don't read enough. And then I intend to talk about them. And maybe some of these videos are going to be pretty short, and some of them, like this one, are pretty long. As you can see, each cover has a really nice picture of an animal that's featured in the book, as well as the character for whom is narrating the book. In this case, it's Jake and a green anole, part of the iguana family. Surprisingly, I don't have any shirts with lizards on them, so the closest I could get is my Charmander, and that's kind of a lizard, right? How I want to try to do this is I took notes before I read the book about what do I remember? What about the plot? Any specifics? What are some things that stand out? Like what's different between now and then? Because this was written in the 90s, 1996 for this first book, I believe. So, for example, there's no cell phones. Computers are limited. What locations do they use as hangouts? Other things are more plot specific. Why can't children not trust adults? Because kids, adolescents are given the ability to morph into animals. What does being a kid limit them in doing or enable them to do? These are questions that I wrote down before reading the book again. Autonomy, because they don't have as much money or a car or things like that, but they don't have to go to work, stuff like that. How many people would willingly choose to be enslaved, join the aliens, to escape living? What is the aliens' goal? Why are they here? What do humans have that aliens need? Because humans want survival, and we try to keep doing that, but they've already conquered other worlds and they have space travel, so what do we offer them instead? Or in addition to that? These are, again, the notes that I'm taking beforehand. The aliens still have to provide for the bodies they've taken over, right? Like nourishment and stuff. So does that mean that they're going to take over our civilization, but also still farm and do work and things like that to provide sustenance? Because are they bad? And I put this in quotations. Are they bad? They're not intrinsically evil, right? Are they part of a hive mind? Are they part of what is the structure of their society that allows them to do this, I guess? And also, can there be aliens who reluctantly are taking on hosts and are not they're not evil just for the fun of it, right? I also had questions about, do they only have the ability to control certain types of creatures or just anything with a brain? How does that work? Because different brain structures, how could they possibly control all of that? I have no idea, but it popped into my head. Also, again, why humans? Why not control gorillas and have dexterous have opposable thumbs, so some dexterity as well as the strength of a gorilla then. All right, I better start with, who are the aliens? The aliens are the Yeerks. I say Yeerk, like Y-U-R-K sounding. However, lots of people pronounce it Yeerks. And Yeerk, just one syllable. Yeerk. I don't know. I like Yeerks, whatever you would like to call them. They're slugs. They're described as kind of like a slug that crawls into your ear canal and takes over the host by controlling the brain. What technology do the Yeerks have access to at this point? Do they have cloaking? Do they clearly have space travel? What else? Is there anything else that stands out? Do they have instant communication? Do they have the equivalent of cell phones, except, better. Before reading, I wrote down all these questions and I was going to pay attention to what did the story have to say about any of them as I went. But I also wrote down, like, what do I remember about, like, the plots, any specifics, anything specific to this book, anything specific to the characters. And so I did actually remember all of the 4 main characters: Jake, Rachel, Marco, Tobias, Cassie. 5. I'm good at math. 5 main characters. I remembered all 5 main characters' names, at least as introduced in this book. I did not remember their personalities very well at all. I wrote down, like, what do I remember them being like? And I was basically completely off on, like, almost all of them. So you have Jake, who is a reluctant leader. He's level-headed, but he's not, like, all-knowing. He's not, like, all-courageous. You have Marco, who is loyal to Jake. I always thought of him as, like, the second in command. He's very reliable is what I wrote down. He's also, after reading, it turns out that he is much more cowardly than I remember him being. Then you have Rachel, Jake's cousin. She is aggressive and a gymnast, attractive, but she's also a bit of a hothead, quick to temper. And I wrote down that she does a lot of the dirty work, and I don't know how that could possibly come up in this first book, but maybe in different books. And then you also have Cassie, who is strategic and compassionate and knows a lot about animals. Both of her parents are veterinarians, and that's why they get a lot of access to different animals in the series. I completely glossed over and forgot about there's another child named Tobias who comes from a broken home. His personality is just not what I remember it being. He wants to escape a lot. And the kids are in, like, 7th or 8th grade. They're not in high school yet. Other notable things to know before I go into the plot and stuff, because there's really no point in me telling you all the stuff that I wrote down before reading the book. Not everything, at least, because it turns out that for whatever reason, almost everything I remembered is covered in the first book, including the plot. The plot is, like, everything from the first book is what I remembered. Maybe some of it a little incorrectly, but for the most part, I remembered quite a bit, and I'm kind of shocked by that. There's another alien species called taxons, which are described as gigantic centipedes with 4 red eyes. Another one is andalites, which are the aliens that are basically at war with the Yeerks. They've been at war for who knows how long. One of them gives the ability to morph to the children in the book. The Yeerks want that power, but they don't have it. A single andalite has been captured alive and is possessed by a Yeerk, and that is Visser 3. The Visser seems to be a title or a rank for the Yeerk, because there are, in other books, I do recall there being, like, a Visser 1. I described andalites as like a centaur with a scorpion tail, no mouth, and another set of eyes on stalks. The book describes them pretty similarly as blue-furred deer with the torso of a person, no mouth, 3 slits for a mouth, I believe, regular set of eyes, as well as eyes on stalk, but also their tail, which is sharp or bladed at the end, which makes them look intimidating for sure. The last alien species is Hork-Bajir. Now, I always pronounced it as Hork-Bajir because I'm basic like that, but the little excerpt on screen here, you can see that the author did an interview, and, you know, sometimes you pronounce things wrong, but Hork-Bajir are described as 7 feet tall with a long, slender neck that ended in a head with 3 horns and a beak, their hands having claws, and maybe their feet too. They look menacing. They are described as being covered in blades. Now, the picture on screen, that is not what I envisioned, but it makes way more sense than whatever I envisioned. I do know that this book resonated with me. It must have, because it's 30 years later almost, and I was able to remember vast chunks of the plot. And now I admit it's a simple book. It's for youth, but that doesn't happen with every book. I can tell you that much. Maybe that's to do with being trans. The idea of morphing or transforming my body into someone or something else that is more to my liking, that was incredibly appealing. The Yeerks are basically taking over, and they're doing a really slow invasion, I guess, which I get, it must mean that they are taking over adults and children, it turns out, and continuing to live their lives, the humans' lives, continuing to go to work and do that kind of stuff, as well as their stated goals in the invasion, which, that's pretty impressive. Good work ethic there. But, yeah, how do these aliens take over all these different brain structures? Because even children and adults have, a different brain structure, don't they, to some extent? But then you take on, add on to that at least 3 different alien species. They can't all have the same kind of brain structure, right? Especially not similar to humans. So at that point, why aren't they taking over every living thing that they can find on Earth? Like rhinoceroses and gorillas and elephants. Just curious. I'm just curious. Other things I was going to keep an eye out for as I was reading are there any examples of neurodivergent people in any way? Are there any trans or autistic or ADHD people, things of this nature? Would the Yeerks, if they got a host that had one of these neurodivergent traits or multiple, would they find it easier or more difficult to take over that person? Because they also have a different structure, right? I can imagine that if they took over a trans person who was pre-transition, but I guess post-egg cracking, that would be double the amount of torture. You lose control of your body, and also you don't even get to move towards having the body that you might want, because I'm assuming that the Yeerk is not going to transition you. They're going to, who cares to them that you're a host, But I also wonder, would the Yeerk experience dysphoria in that case? Or what if they took over a person who was transitioning? Would they cease transition, or would they keep it going? Or I suppose if a Yeerk was going to take over a trans person who was already in the process of transition, to avoid raising suspicion, they may just keep transitioning, right? Some of the other questions that I had, why do I remember some of this so well? Why is it so vivid? Or why did it resonate with me so much? And does it still? What did I get wrong? What did I get right? But if I don't tell you all the stuff that I took notes for, how are you going to know? How are you going to know? Who's going to know? How well is the world built? And how much of it do you have to kind of infer? How much detail is given? Also, the Yeerks, they have to leave their host every so often and swim in a pool with other Yeerks to gain something. The Yeerks have to leave the host, go to a pool to revitalize, get whatever nutrient they need, and then they can retake over the host. As far as I can remember, hosts do recall what happens to them while they're under control. It's not like they're dead inside or anything. So now I'll talk about the plot of this book, what happens in it, and fill in some of the blanks. The first page talks about who the character is. It's Jake. Jake's on the cover. Yeerk hosts are called controllers, and the setting is some town. Just some generic town. Some city, could be anywhere. That makes me think that it's pretty easy for anyone to kind of insert themselves into this location and fit into this setting. Oh, this could be my town. So Jake and Marco are at the mall arcade. They've just run out of quarters. They're about to leave. And I only have to mention because it made me giggle a little bit. But Marco is good at games and analyzing them. And Jake is okay at games because he has a Sega at home. Which one, Jake? I assume a Sega Master System, because that's what I probably had at the time. He's ruminating on how he failed to make the basketball team, and his brother Tom plays basketball in high school, and he's going to be disappointed that Jake didn't make the team. So Tobias sees Marco and Jake as they're leaving, and they all decide to leave together. Tobias got bullied at school, and Jake stood up for him, so they're friends now. Also leaving them all are Rachel and Cassie, so all of our 5 are on their way out the door. They decide to cut through an abandoned construction site instead of going around it, and while doing so, an alien spaceship is coming down from the sky. And it's also notable, I thought, that everyone except for Tobias seems scared. He seems excited. I just put note of that. He didn't have the same reaction as the rest of them. 1 out of 5 characters did not react in terror. This is being the 90s. There's no cell phones. And so one of the characters says, we should go home and get a video camera or a camera so that we can capture some video of this event. Tobias walks towards the ship and starts talking to it hello, we mean you no harm. The ship starts to open, and Andalite comes down. He's clearly wounded. This is the Andalite Elfangor. I always read this as Elfangor, but Elfangor is dying. He bestows upon the children the ability to morph into different creatures, different animals, basically by touching them and absorbing a part of their DNA or something. But the Andalites communicate via telepathy, and that can include feelings or images. He relays a ton of exposition at our protagonists here. He tells them about the Yeerks, and how they are taking over the Earth, and they number maybe in the hundreds right now, but they're coming, and they try to gain willing hosts, but if not, they'll take over a body by force. The Yeerks and the Andalites are at war, and more Andalites are coming, but it's going to take at least a year for them to get there. He also relays a whole bunch of information on the other aliens, the taxons, the Hork-Bajir. The telepathy can be directed or it can be omnidirectional, as well as you can read the thoughts of somebody if they concentrate at you, I guess. So basically you can send thoughts, even if you're non-telepathic, to somebody who is telepathic. The kids they get all of this exposition, they get the ability to morph, and then they gotta go hide because 2 more ships are coming out of the sky, and the alien is like, get out of here. Those are Yeerks, and you don't want to be here. And so they just hide behind some rubble over off to the side or whatever. Tobias lingered slightly and during the encounter with Elfangor and had gotten some extra exposition that we were given. And that's how we know that the Yeerks need to go to those pools every so often, every 3 days, to get replenished. Elfangor also gave the kids a little bit of information on the morphing ability, how they can morph into other animals or creatures or whatever, but also did say, do not morph for more than 2 hours or you're going to be stuck like that and you won't be able to get back, and you don't want that. And so I thought that was kind of interesting that the Yeerks aren't all powerful. They have to spend some time out of their hosts every so often, just like our protagonists can't stay morphed forever. They have a time limit. So there's both sides have a drawback somewhere. And Visser 3 also has a ship coming down, so 3 ships total. Think of it similar to how Darth Vader had his own ship, and then there was other just regular boring spaceships, and his was special. Just like that. Visser 3 comes down to gloat and say oh my goodness, you're Prince Elfangor of the Andalites, and we just killed you. Ha ha ha. And he also gloats. He's broadcasting this for everyone in the vicinity about how he's gonna become Visser 1, or at least he's gonna move up the ranks, and what fortune he has to kill this guy. He says that the Andalite dome ship, which maybe is a battalion of Andalites or something, was shot down and burnt up in the atmosphere. And I have no idea how nobody noticed a big ship burning up in the atmosphere, but that it is what it is. Nobody was looking up back then. It's also relayed to us that the Yeerks want bodies. They have all the taxons, they have all the Hork-Bajir, and that's not a lot apparently, and they're going to have to make more Yeerks just to be able to enslave more humans, because there's billions of us, and they are looking forward to it. Visser 3 morphs into some gigantic creature and eats Elfangor. The other Yeerks, the taxons and the Hork-Bajir around, fired their Dracon beams and disintegrated, evaporated, whatever they did something and made Elfangor's ship disappear. So they do have weapons that can make things, basically reduce them down to nothing. At some point, the kids made some noise and get chased by all the guards surrounding the Visser. Some taxons, some Hork-Bajir, as well as some humans. So there's human voices saying they're over here. And they all split up, take off in different directions, and somehow outrun all of these people. And they kind of yada yada. They made it home, okay? They split up and they just made it home, and it's the next morning, okay? No one even got noticed or captured. It was very fortuitous. In the morning, Jake is that was probably just a really bad, weird, vivid dream. And Tobias comes over and is that was crazy, wasn't it? And also, I turned into my cat. Watch this. And he morphs into a cat in front of him. Some more lore dropped on us that you can't morph clothing. And that does get a little bit alleviated. They can morph like skin tight clothing, so like thin skin tight leotard or something, they might be able to morph that. One of the notes I took here that I don't know if it's foreshadowing because of what happens later, but I did notice that Jake is narrating in the past tense for Tobias, and I don't recall that being the case in other instances, but maybe it was just the features or the way he was talking here. He's spoken past tense about Tobias, and that could be because there's foreshadowing about what happens at the end of the book, or maybe these are supposed to be written from the perspective of years later when the war is all over and maybe Tobias is dead or something. I don't know. Also, I guess at some point Marco must have come over. Marco, Jake, and Tobias are hanging out, and we learn that Marco is really reluctant. He does not want to join the cause of fighting the Yeerks. They're just children after all. Let the adults handle it. Marco lives with his dad. His mom died in the past, and that's why he's got some trauma. He does not want to like die on his dad or anything like that. He's just like way more cautious than I remember him being. So Tom, Jake's older brother, has been acting a little bit off lately, and at breakfast said, "Oh yeah, I quit basketball," and he's not bothered at all that Jake didn't make the team, but he does keep mentioning this group called the Sharing, and he was really suspicious the way he was talking and asking about like the night before, like, "Oh hey, you were at the mall. Did you cut through the construction yard at all?" or anything like that, you know, like not very subtle. And Marco immediately was like, "He's a controller." And Jake was like, "Nuh-uh." He got all mad about it. But they found out that the cops were infiltrated and not to be trusted because in the newspaper Jake was reading, there was something going on at the construction yard, bright lights and stuff. The cops wrote it off and said, "That's fireworks, and we're looking for the kids who were setting them off if anyone knows anything." Nothing about UFOs or aliens. Even Tom mentioned it, and like, I have to wonder, what kind of people are reading, what kind of kids are reading newspapers? I don't recall being like big into newspapers in the 90s myself, but I might not have been a typical child. Just one of the things that stood out to me was a newspaper being like a common thing for a kid to read before school, I guess. So Tobias, Marco, and Jake go meet up with Cassie and Rachel at her house. Cassie shows like she's morphed into a horse and she can run around as a horse, and it's so awesome. So while they're all there talking, a cop comes up and questions them. Kids didn't know anything about whatever happened in the construction yard. Nothing to see here. And so he goes away. Tobias gets a hawk to morph into from the barn because the veterinarian parents of Cassie, they like rescue animals and rehabilitate them, and they have a barn full of animals to do that with. They all agree that like maybe they won't join as like full resistance fighters, but they're definitely not going to just forget anything ever happened. They did convince Marco to at least join them for the mission or join them for this time. And they all agreed to tell Tom that they're going to go to the event that's happening like that night at the Sharing is hosting a bonfire on the beach. The event is supposed to, it looks on the outside like it's just a fun night out for, you know, youth and some chaperones watching them. But they do get the idea that like the vibes are off and the chaperones are watching people just a little bit too hard, you know? Tom is telling Jake about how awesome it is if he would join the Sharing. The Sharing's so cool. You got to join the Sharing. But he's got to go off and do something because he's one of the chaperones. He's one of the elders or whatever it is. He's a full member, so he's got to go off and do a thing. So Jake should just mingle with the other people. In that second, something in Tom's face changed, and like the Yeerk must have lost control for a half second, and his muscles twitched and his eyes showed something, you know? And Jake knew that Tom is a controller. Tobias was scoping all of this out as a hawk from the air and relaying like, all right, well, here's where Tom is going. There's a little alcove. You can go see some people over here. It's noted multiple times at this point that Tobias does not like having to unmorph from being a hawk. He very much enjoys being a hawk and escaping and not having to deal with his issues because he's a hawk. I wonder why I didn't remember that detail, because that sounds very similar to how I probably would have felt as a very young trans child. Tobias is helping keep a watch as a hawk. Cassie, Marco, and Rachel are just mingling with the other Sharing people, and Jake is going to go and spy on the full members who are having their little meetup. Jake turns into his pet dog so that he can go spy on Tom and the rest of the members. It's noted that like he has to act like a dog so as not to be suspicious. So like he can't just be like a dog like army crawling on the ground and stuff. He has to actually like pretend to be a dog, but also get close to the members. That was a cute little touch. I liked that. He's able to hear very well, but he can't see very well because apparently dogs don't have great night vision. He finds out that the assistant principal at their school is a controller. He's the one that's leading the lookout for them. He was there at the construction site. And so he knows that there's children that need capturing. Also, he learns that Tom has to go to the Yerk pool and get revitalized on Monday. And this was like Friday or something. It's the next day or the weekend or whatever. And they formulate the plan that Jake is going to spy on the principal, the assistant principal, for who knows how long, and maybe he'll have some useful information to say. He's going to do this in the form of a green anole. I've got questions. I have so many questions. One, why would the principal be doing like invasion tasks while he's supposed to be working at school? What would make them think that the assistant principal would have useful information that he's going to like be on the phone with the visor in the middle of the day? Sure, he has like an office and stuff, but like why would he be doing alien business while he's at the school in full view and hearing of everyone? I don't know. Also, he's only going to be able to spy for like little less than 2 hours at a time. Jake gets into his locker after the bell rings and no one's in the hallway. He morphs into a lizard. Here's a good point to tell you that when they morph into an animal, they are still conscious and in control, but also they have like the animal instincts. And so if they're a dog, they're happy, they want to chase sticks. If they're a cat, they want to play with string. If they're a lizard, they don't want to be out in the open. Jake starts to gain control, and he starts to get the lizard body to move down the hall. Out of nowhere, a shoe steps on his tail. What luck that lizard tails, at least some of them, are detachable. It turns out, though, that his tail was stepped on accidentally. It wasn't like somebody was trying to kill him. And it turns out that it was also the assistant principal. So he starts following the principal, goes into a janitor closet. Wouldn't you know it, inside the janitor closet, there's a hidden passage. And it goes all the way down to a Yerk pool. Incredibly serendipitous that they would just get all this information that they needed right away. Didn't even really have to try for it. Just kind of stumbled into it. So after school, Tobias, Cassie, Marco, Jake, and Rachel meet up. They are eating at the mall, and they're trying to come up with a plan to infiltrate the Yerk pool, and it has to be tonight because that's when Tom's going to be there. So his Yerk is going to leave his body. We need to go rescue Tom while that happens. They don't know anything else about how this wall works, but like they're dead set on doing it tonight, which makes sense, I guess. They're not thinking, they're youth. They don't have the best strategic faculties. So they decide to go from the mall to the gardens, which is where Cassie's mom works. And the gardens is like a little zoo, wildlife, amusement park type thing. And they're going to go acquire some animals so that they can actually, engage in combat or something, because all they have at this point is a hawk, a cat, a dog, and a lizard. So they're going to go get some more animals, different animals, and possibly some more dangerous animals. They go from the mall to the gardens. They're able to just walk through the door into the back rooms where animals might be kept or where the handlers' cages or the handlers' areas are. And Cassie knows all this because that's where her mom works. And, here's the housing and feeding areas. But, are those doors not locked, not guarded, not anything? Even in the 90s? At any rate, they go in. Cassie says, behind this door, there's a gorilla. And with some teasing, Marco goes in and he gets to be a gorilla. And that's the animal that I actually most associate with Marco. When they acquire an animal's form, when they gain the ability, the animal sort of enters like a trance, for 10 seconds it just kind of sits there and becomes a zombie for a second. An adult comes by in a cart and is just like, hey kids, what the heck? What kind of lax security do they got going on here? But eventually, some security guard does notice them. It is like, hey, what the heck? And starts chasing them. They all split up. Marco and Jake going down one hallway. Rachel, Cassie, and Tobias going down various others at point. Marco and Jake, they get away from the security guard long enough to like get around a corner, find a door, and they go into it. They're like, why isn't the security guard following us? They're just kind of hiding in a bush that's in this enclosure, which made me wonder, why did this door lead directly to an exhibit when the other door led to like a back room behind the exhibit? But in this case, it leads directly to the exhibit for tigers. There's tigers in this area, and that's why the guards aren't coming. And Jake and Marco bump into one of those tigers, and it doesn't look very interested in them. And so Jake touches the tiger, gets the ability to morph into the tiger, and he's like, all right, we have a few seconds. We're gonna bolt for that ladder over there. And there's a ladder that like climbs up over the wall to get out of the enclosure. Okay, so there's a second tiger. Onlookers, because there's people looking into the exhibit, like there's guests at the zoo type place watching the tiger. They somehow outran the second tiger and made it up the ladder unscathed. Crazy luck they've got. Some guards are like, hey, those are the kids coming out of the tiger exhibit. We don't want them to get away. And they chase after them again. Jake and Marco run into a crowd of people and just kind of duck down so that they get blend in with the crowd, and that's it. They make their way to the parking lot and leave. What? No cameras? No nothing. They just kind of leave. I just find that like pretty unbelievable. How big of a crowd did they walk into that like a bunch of adult security guards couldn't be like, oh, it was the person in the red shirt and the blue shirt, and like, you know, there must be so many people there. But anyways, it turns out none of the others were even chased. It was all on Marco and Jake. The others, they gained some animals, but we don't know what. So they go back to the school, and their plan is to go in through a window that they know doesn't lock, because it's after school hours, of course. And they're going to go in through the lab window, and then they're going to go to the janitor's closet, and they're going to save Tom. And that's the extent of the plan. Tobias is already morphed into a hawk instead of being with them. I didn't realize he was a hawk so much already in the first book. So at this point, we've just got Jake and Rachel and Marco, and Tobias as a hawk. Cassie is nowhere to be found. But they don't want to scrap the mission. The kids sneak into the school through the unlocked window. So once they're in, they get to the doorway and they see people walking around, or at least some people are walking by here. Turns out the people walking by are Cassie and the cop who questioned them earlier. And he's forcing Cassie to go along with. So that's where Cassie is. So their plan at this point is the hallway's empty. All the Yeerk hosts and all the controllers probably don't know each other. So we're just going to pretend that we're controllers, go to the janitor closet, and go down the passageway as though we are controllers. That's a pretty good plan, I guess. I mean, I don't see a problem with it. In my brain, this all makes sense, except Tobias is still a hawk. He's perched on Jake's shoulder. That's not a usual thing for anybody, but okay. Luckily, no one was there when they got to the janitor's closet or in the hallway. They are descending the stairs here. Under the school, there is a gigantic cavern, and there's some like small buildings and huts and stuff like that, probably for supplies or whatever. It's massive. In the middle of it, there's a Yeerk pool that's like 100-foot across round pool, and there's a pier on one side where controllers are, and they lean forward and a Yeerk slimes out of them, and then they are taken to a cage. The other side, there's another pier where a person's head gets dipped into the pool and they come out a controller. This does give me the question of like, does each Yeerk get their own host? Like, do they control the same person every time? Or do different Yeerks just, whoever's up next? It's not brought up here, but it's just one of those things that like, they just say like they slime out of their ears on one end, and then they slime into their ears on the other end, but like they don't say, like, how would you know? How would you know who's going into the pool, you know? The cages have children, they have adults, they have Hork-Bajir. Taxons are actually willing participants, so taxons are basically evil. They're described as bad centipedes. There's also some people and aliens, which we're going to call people, that are like watching TV and joking off to the side. And those are the willing participants. The willing people are called collaborators, and they don't have to be put in cages. They can just go watch TV or whatever until it's their turn. I don't think they described it as traumatic as it really would be. Like, obviously, the people are not willing participants who are not willing participants in this are going to fight and stuff. They've already had their autonomy taken away. and they're being put into cages. They're going to be surrounded by other people who are in the same situation. The trauma that is like repeatedly being inflicted upon them is like, damn, that is some dark stuff for a kid's book. Like, obviously they don't go into the details here because like it's a kid's book, but like as an adult, I can recognize that that would be incredibly traumatic. And maybe they will bring that up in other books, but like all of this is like talked about as they're walking down the stairs. They go duck behind one of those buildings that I talked about, and they're noticed by a trio of guards, a human, a Hork-Bajir, and a Taxxon. I don't know why they always come in threes like that. What was that? They get noticed by this patrol. Rachel turns into an elephant and takes out the human and the Taxxon and the Hork-Bajir. Marco turns into the gorilla, and Jake turns into a tiger. And it's mentioned multiple times that Rachel's making noise. Jake is roaring. Jake roars multiple times. I also have questions. So clearly, a Yeerk can live outside of a body for at least some amount of time, at least provided it's in a pool with whatever is in that pool. But what about, like, does killing the host kill the Yeerk? Is it immediate? Because if it isn't, wouldn't one of those Yeerks that, like, Rachel, like, flung the human against a wall or something, or flung it 30 feet or something, right? And now it's a dead human. But there's still a Yeerk in the brain. Is the Yeerk alive? Could it just slide out and go into a different human? And then it would have the memories that it had before? No? Isn't that how this works? And so if they did get discovered, like, hey, we saw 3 children over here, and then my host died, but you put me in a new host and I can describe them to you. Or does the Yeerk die immediately because the body died? I'm not entirely sure. And it also makes me wonder, like, how well the Yeerks can remember. I'm not entirely sure how it all works or anything like that. Or maybe they just die when the host dies. So anyways, they kill the first group that notices them, and then some more notice, and Jake roars, and maybe more notice, who knows. But they all come attacking empty-handed. We know that they have basically laser guns. Why are they not shooting? At some point, they do eventually remember that they have guns, but they never hit our heroes, our protagonists. Jake and Rachel are basically doing their best to, like, fend off guards and such. Marco frees the people from the cages. Jake saves Cassie at the very last second from going into the pool and getting a Yeerk in her, which would totally blow their cover. She turns into the horse from earlier, takes one of the prisoners on her back, and, like, everyone's making their way to the stairs. Visser 3 shows up, though. For some reason, Visser 3 shows up. He's arrived. He starts morphing into a gigantic, tall as a tree, it's described, creature that has 8 arms, 8 legs, 8 heads, and shoots fireballs out of its mouth. And he assumes that these wild animals that are running around trying to free people are Andalites. Rogue Andalites who must have survived the dome ship or gotten out on escape pods or whatever, right? Andalites are the only ones who have morphing technology, so it's a pretty logical assumption to make. Visser is shooting fireballs off at all sorts of the escapees, at our main heroes. Never happens to hit dramatically any of our core group, but does kill a few humans or something like that. Everyone manages to make it back up the stairs. The Visser tries to chase them, but once you know it, his big old body's just too big, and he doesn't think to maybe, like, unmorph. He just kind of gave up and let him get away. They did save a single person. The person on Cassie's back. They don't even give that person a name or anything. No idea what happened to them afterwards. They just kind of, we made it up the stairs, and we all made it back home. What happened to the people? What happened to that woman you freed? Did she freak out and be like, oh my god, this horse freed me. That's pretty lucky. Look at that tiger and that elephant and that gorilla. Or did she, like, have a mental breakdown? I was just the host to an alien for the last who knows how long, and now I'm free? What do I do now? No idea. Doesn't matter. Yada yada. They make it out of the school. They make it back home. They did not rescue Tom. He's a controller again. What about the cop who was escorting Cassie to the Yeerk pool? Don't know. Cassie took care of it. We have to assume she murdered a cop. Tobias flies and meets up at Jake's house and meets him at his window as a hawk. And Jake is like, oh, you can stay here the night, just unmorph. And turns out that Tobias did not make it out when everyone else made it out. He is now stuck as a hawk. I'm not entirely sure what the specifics are, but he is now a hawk for sure. And that's how the first book ended. They did touch a little bit on the trauma that like Jake was feeling from like having all of this, the adrenaline and the trauma of that mission that they went on. That's how the book ends. Tobias is a hawk. They saved one person. The Yeerks now know that there's definitely somebody as a resistance here. Questions that I had after reading or during reading. Would they talk about the animal instincts taking over, being able to fight for control and stuff like that, or wanting to have control? But they didn't mention that at all when they were in the middle of that Yeerk pool battle. Like, no tiger instincts, no elephant instincts, no gorilla instincts. Did they just not have them? Or can they just like, oh, we're in the middle of a fight. We don't need to care about that kind of stuff. Does Visser 3 have to fight the animal instincts of the things that he's morphing into? Or as a Yeerk-controlled host, does the Yeerk just like, I'm in control all the time? Because we know that Tom had that brief instance of like a flash of something that like Jake picked up on. So like, clearly the Yeerks aren't like all powerfully in control, right? Basically, my thoughts on this book are they gloss over a lot of aspects of like, how do the kids get away from the construction yard, from the zoo people, from the final battle at the school there? Nobody notices them. Stuff like that like, I just find that fascinating. I understand that it's written for a younger crowd, and I guess I can kind of excuse how they don't get into the minutia and include that. So you can fill in the blanks and stuff like that. I did enjoy that this first book was pretty good at setting up the world and included a lot of elements that they can build upon. And I'm pretty sure that this is a theme that's going to come up again based on like some vague stuff I have remembered reading on the internet. But they did touch on the terror and the shock and the trauma that like all of this leads to, having like child soldiers, having an alien invasion take over your mind, that kind of stuff. Some of the glossing over, I also don't know if that's because this is the first book and that's going to like get fleshed out more as the author gets a little more experienced, or if it's going to be like intentionally vague a lot. Anyways, I don't expect all of the videos are going to be this long. This being the first one and me, figuring things out, I think is going to be a little bit longer than usual. I would definitely like to try to make these a little bit shorter. Ideally, I would like to come out with one video a week. One book a week doesn't sound unreasonable to me. Maybe that is pretty ambitious for somebody with my work ethic. Either way, I'm excited to start going through these. What are your thoughts? Anything you think I should include in these, or anything that like maybe I didn't pick up on that you want me to know about? Feel free to leave me a comment letting me know. Subscribe, all that stuff. Until next time, thanks for listening.